This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, we now bring you a discussion on developments in Sri Lanka. The participants are G. Parthasarthi, former diplomat, and Manas Pratin Bhuyan, journalist.
Ambassador Parthasarthi, Sri Lanka witnessed extraordinary events on Saturday as after a day of Parian violence, the country's two senior leaders, President Gotabaya Rajapakse and Prime Minister Wickramasinghe, have agreed to step down and to pave the way for formation of an all-party government. How do you see the unprecedented events that have taken place in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think first of all, we must appreciate the commitment of the people of Sri Lanka to democracy. When democracy was under threat by people who were really lost public confidence, they stood firm. And it is really the public opinion of Sri Lanka which has prevailed over the ruling party. So now it's a question of selecting a new government, and it will take time because you need a consensus. The main party is ruled out from that consensus. So that will take time, but nevertheless it can and should be achieved. And we should naturally view it positively because at this point in time, they are suffering immeasurably from the economic breakdown. And that economic breakdown started by wrong administrative decisions. Agricultural production fell because the government issued instructions that fertilizer should not be used. The people have also had other natural calamities which have added to this, but certainly the government has to take a high responsibility. It is no longer in power. So we'll have to wait patiently because I don't know how long the Sri Lankan politicians will take to get a consensus or a unanimity for a national government till fresh elections are held.
Mr. Parthasarthi, it was a well-known fact that Rajapaksa family was close to Beijing, and a lot of companies in Sri Lanka had actually borrowed money from Chinese firms, Chinese financial institutions. What kind of impact the lowest borrowing had on Sri Lanka's economy? Because I'm talking about the debt trap.
Well, I think the Rajapaksa family placed too much faith in China. They built facilities in their own constituency in Hambantota, which means they built a port there and an airport there. Now both are located in a place where there is no aircraft flying in or ships calling in. The ports are Colombo or elsewhere. So that has been a huge loss. The Chinese, for all practical purposes, administer it. We have our serious concerns because in the Bay of Bengal, if a Sri Lankan port is being managed by the Chinese and run by the Chinese in the constituency of the President and Prime Minister, we can't ignore it. So that is something we have been objecting for a long time. But in any case, the Chinese do not forgive debts. That's the hard reality. They take possession of property. Pakistan is going to face the same problem as Sri Lanka. And therefore, the whole Chinese project is stuck up. China has given no assistance thus far to Sri Lanka, any significant proportions for them to meet the challenges. The largest aid giver has been India. We have pledged about $3 billion. Their food requirements, their petroleum requirements, everything have been met from the cooperation which India has extended. And therefore we are just, I think, doing it right. Let the Sri Lankans make up their mind. We are a good neighbor. We will be continuing this assistance and help them to the maximum assistance possible. This is one side of it. The other side of it is, the question is that real assistance can come in only from the IMF and the World Bank, sort of money which Sri Lanka is going to need. And I think when our finance minister was there, she made a bid with the IMF to see this gets expedited. But then the IMF and World Bank proceed rather slowly in finalizing these things, and we can only hope they'll get expedited. But the problems of Sri Lanka are going to continue. Even now, I suppose, we will still have to provide whatever petroleum resources from credits we have given them. We will now have to continue providing medicines and medical assistance that they require. So I think we have a responsibility and we are fulfilling it as a friendly neighbor.
Mr. Parthasarthi, you have been closely watching developments in Sri Lanka. Yesterday, we have seen angry protesters storming President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's official residence and setting President Ranil Wickramasinghe's private house on fire. In culmination of months of agitation over the ongoing economic crisis. What is the short-term and long-term implications of these massive protests for Sri Lanka?
Well, look at it this way. I think Mr. Rajapaksa got a good mandate, the Prime Minister, the Gotabaya's younger brother, the President's younger brother, and became Prime Minister. And the fact of the matter is that they did not do well economically. In fact, they took some decisions which were very injurious. They took a decision not to use fertilizer in their agricultural production. Obviously, production fell. And otherwise, normally they should be all right, but not importing as much as they're doing at the moment. And we would have to fill in on that and on, as I said, on petrol, on medicines. These are essentials, but I think the various credits that we've extended, they say, press estimates say about $3 billion, that should help them partially, but they would have to pull up their socks. But certainly, and one does not really know how long it will take to form a coalition government, because these are disparate parties coming together in very difficult times.
Ambassador Parthasarathi, India has reacted to the developments in Sri Lanka, reacted a couple of hours back. In its first reaction, India said it stands by the people of Sri Lanka in their aspirations for prosperity and progress through democratic means, values, established institutions, and constitutional framework. So how do you see this reaction by India to the developments in Sri Lanka?
You see, in developments like this, democracy sometimes gets short-circuited or bypassed. And what India is suggesting to our Sri Lankan friends is, whatever you do, we will support you, but please do so respecting your own democratic values, because past experience has shown that if governments become authoritarian, in such a situation it will be very difficult to manage. And Sri Lanka is in a really, really difficult situation. So yes, the remark is timely, and they know it is coming from a good friend. They know for a fact that the Chinese, for whatever reasons, have not been as forthcoming as in the past. And the World Bank and the IMF seem to be asking for this meeting this condition and that condition. And really, rather than give them money soon, they are still working out the details.
Mr. Parthasarathi, India has already provided USD 3.8 billion in assistance to Sri Lanka to help it dealing with the crisis in pursuance of its neighborhood first policy. And India has been sending fuel and food supplies to Sri Lanka as well. Do you expect India to just, step up its assistance at a time when Sri Lanka has been actually looking for assistance from neighboring countries as well as international donors and friends?
Well, I think the $3.8 billion which you referred to, I don't think they have consumed that much of our total assistance. So we still have provisions. We can supply them medicines. We can perhaps, at a pinch, supply them some rice if they ask for it. That would really depend on our own domestic needs. But yes, we are the only people now putting in assistance like this. I think the Chinese have now woken up rather late in the day, and some money from the Chinese may come in, but it will come in difficult circumstances.
Mr. Parthasarathi, we have seen, in fact, street protests in Sri Lanka for last 6-7 months, and the protesters had been demanding resignation of Gotabaya Rajapaksa as the president of the country. Do you think, in fact, this announcement yesterday that Gotabaya Rajapaksa is stepping down is very late actually? He should have quit from his position long back?
Well, I think, you see, in the case of matters like this, it's very difficult to say because it's a political decision. And only the Prime Minister or the President of the country will have the full facts to decide on that. But I was rather surprised that after Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is the elder brother, sort of put in his papers as Prime Minister, that the younger brother, Gotabaya, stayed on for so long. I think there should have been earlier effort at building a government of national unity or national consensus, which is what a nation needs. And I think the Sri Lankan public's behavior has been incredible. I mean, changing an elected government with very powerful rulers who have been very popular for a long time in this manner speaks very loudly of their commitment to democracy.
I mean, one more observations we have seen in the media about the Western countries not heeding to a request by Sri Lanka for help. And there have been criticism of the Western powers that they are not actually forthcoming in supporting Sri Lanka when it is drilling under a severe crisis, basically food and energy crisis. So how do you see the criticism?
I don't understand their priority. They are pouring in hundreds of millions in Ukraine. It's not very clear, but anyway, they are doing that. And they are not prepared to help a country in such dire need? Where is the question of the West now proclaiming a high moral ground? And I must say, this has really shocked me, people like us who have served in Washington and in other Western capitals. It is disappointing, the Western reaction to these events in Sri Lanka.
So, how this situation will pan out, Ambassador Parthasarathy, from here on in Sri Lanka? In fact, what is your prediction, or in fact, how do you see this situation panning out in the next few months?
It's going to be very tight. The essential requirements are three. One is fuel for running around, the other is medicines, and the third is food. We are trying to fill in all three, but there are also limits to the resources we can spare. We have poured in everything when all these rich countries are sitting back and talking about war and sanctions across Ukraine, instead of dealing with genuine causes of democracy, of hunger and economic needs. Instead of doing that, they're into running a war and pouring in money there. I don't know what their priorities are.
In its statement, the External Affairs Ministry, Ambassador Parthasarathy also said that we are aware of many challenges that Sri Lanka and its people have been facing, and we have stood with the Sri Lankan people as they have tried to overcome this difficult period. What do you make out of this?
I say the basic commitment in Sri Lanka is we've made it clear. Otherwise, if we favor one political party or do too much for the ruling party, opposition will start complaining. We don't want to get into that situation. That is the reason why we concentrate on what people need, and it will not be politicized. Otherwise, there is a tendency, I'm sorry to say, in Sri Lanka, particularly amongst some of the political parties, to politicize this. Then there is the China factor. There is a good, strong China lobby. They will be used. So I think for us also it's a delicate diplomatic exercise, and I must pay tribute to everybody who's involved. Of course, the Prime Minister, but certainly the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar. He has served earlier in Sri Lanka even as a first secretary or a councillor in the 80s. So he knows Sri Lanka pretty well. And hats off to him and the others. And the finance minister also helped when she spoke out for the Sri Lankan assistance when she was in Washington.
My last question, Ambassador Parthasarathy, is about overall situation. Do you think the internal instability in Sri Lanka and developments in Sri Lanka will have any impact on the regional security or geopolitics of the region?
You see, right now, Sri Lanka is of little use to anyone because of its economic state. The Chinese, with all their money and hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign exchange reserves, have done nothing. And it's been only they are willing to spend money where there are Chinese projects, it's Chinese labor. This is true of Chinese projects across, it happens in Africa. They do not utilize local resources or train local resources to become self-reliant. It has to be getting them totally dependent on China. And this is what has happened in Sri Lanka. They've sure built the Hambantota, and that too because it was in the constituency of the Rajapaksas. And it's a port and an airport nobody can use. So the real concern we have is, have they built it for long-term use in the Indian Ocean? It's well positioned for that.
Ambassador Parthasarathy, thank you for your overall perspective about crisis in Sri Lanka. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on developments in Sri Lanka. The participants were G. Parthasarathy, former diplomat, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.